Welcome to the Wisdom That Breathes channel. Across all our platforms, we try to share wisdom which is relevant and accessible to everyone. But on this particular platform, we go deeper into some of the ancient principles found within the scriptures. If you find some of the terminology difficult or inaccessible, then go over to our Keshava Swami YouTube channel where you'll be able to find other content which is perhaps more relatable. Thank you and enjoy the wisdom that breathes.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nasta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavakti Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. So welcome this morning. Today we're reading from Canto number 2, chapter number 9, entitled Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. And today we're reading from text number 39. So maybe just to give some context before we begin the verse. So the Bhagavatam, the beautiful Srimad Bhagavatam, the narrations of the Supreme Lord, contain 12 cantos, and it's said that there are 10 subjects. Atra sargo visargascha stanam bhoshanam utaya manvantareshanu katha nirodha muktir ashraya. And different commentators explain how these subjects are divided and whether they are divided, and they all illuminate different perspectives. But in one explanation, it's described that the 10 cantos of the Bhagavatam really begin from the third canto, and that the first and the second cantos are foundational cantos in which we are learning two specific things which prepare us to relish and absorb the full potency of Srimad Bhagavatam. So according to Sridhar Swami, the first canto is centered around the subject of adhikar. In the first canto, we're hearing different conversations. We're hearing the conversation between Sutta Goswami and the sages. We're hearing the conversation between Narad and Vyas. And ultimately, we come to hear the conversation between Sukadev and Parikshit. And in these conversations, in these interactions between speaker and listener, if one looks very, very closely, then one is able to grasp what is the adhikar of someone who can speak Bhagavatam and what is the actual adhikar of someone who can receive. So the first canto prepares us by telling us what kind of heart we should culture in order to absorb this beautiful knowledge. And then it's described that the second canto is dealing with the topic of sadhana. One once has the adhikar. In English, we say first deserve, then desire. In other words, one is having the necessary qualifications, then one can desire to connect with the Supreme Lord. And sadhana is the means of attainment, the means of how we actually connect with the Supreme Lord. And so it's explained that in the second canto, there are 10 chapters. And the first 2 chapters are dealing with dharana or absorption. How does the devotee of the Lord who wants to connect with the Supreme Person, how do they become absorbed in the name, fame, form, qualities, and pastimes of the Lord? And then it said chapters number 3 and 4 are dealing with utsaha, which means enthusiasm. Anyone who wants to connect with the Supreme Lord must have an enthusiasm to absorb the knowledge of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, we are learning this when Sutta Goswami is replying to the various inquiries placed. And in the same way, Sukadev is also replying to Parikshit's inquiries. And then it said that the final 5 chapters of the second canto are dealing with Smriti, or how do we remember the Supreme Lord. So these are components of sadhana: absorption, enthusiasm, remembrance. When one has fully grasped these elements, then they can connect with the Supreme Lord in a very, very powerful way. So now we are reading the 9th chapter of the second canto. And this is a very, very important passage. We have just read the 4 seed verses that are spoken to Lord Brahma by Lord Sri Krishna himself. Just to rewind, we know that Brahma was born in the universe, and Brahma had no idea, who am I, where am I, and what am I supposed to do? In the world today, they call it midlife crisis. But Brahmaji was right at the beginning of his life, and already it was coming. So someone once said to me, "How old are you?" I said, 43. He said, "You're in the zone." I said, "Really?" He said, "It's coming, midlife crisis." I go, Hare Krishna. So Brahmaji had an existential crisis. Sometimes this happens. We wonder, what am I doing in my life? So we know that Brahmaji heard the 16th and the 21st consonants of the Sanskrit alphabet, ta, pa, and he understood. This is very powerful. He just heard the sound. He never saw the Lord, but he just heard the sound. And he realized the sound is non-different from the Lord. It's just as good. And therefore he engaged in those many, many years of penance. And then finally the Supreme Lord appeared. And then the Supreme Lord instructed him to create and instructed him in the Chatushloki Bhagavatam. So now the Lord has instructed him in the Bhagavatam in 4 verses. Now we are hearing what happened next. So please repeat after me. Antarhitendriyarthaya Haraye Vihitanjali Sarvabhutamayo Vishvam Sasarjedam Sapurvavar Antarhitendriyarthaya Haraye Vihitanjali Sarvabhutamayo Vishvam Sasarjedam Sapurvavar Antarhitendriyarthaya Haraye Vihitanjali Sarvabhutamayo Vishvam Sasarjedam Sapurvavar Antarhitendriyarthaya Antarhitendriyarthaya Matajis. Antarhitendriyarthaya Antarhita, on the disappearance, Indriyarthaya, unto the personality of Godhead, the objective of all senses, Haraye, unto the Lord, Vihitanjali, in folded hands, Sarvabhuta, all living entities, Maya, full of, Vishvam, the universe, Sasarja, created, Idam, this, Saha, he, Brahmaji, Purvavat, exactly like before. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Translation. On the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, who is the object of transcendental enjoyment for the senses of devotees, Brahma, with folded hands, began to recreate the universe, full with living entities, as it was previously. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is the object for fulfilling the senses of all living entities. Illusioned by the glaring reflection of the external energy, the living entities worship the senses instead of engaging them properly in fulfilling the desires of the Supreme. In the Hari Bhakti Sudadhaya 13.2, there is the following verse. Akshno phalam tvadrisha darshanam hi tano phalam tvadrisha gatra sangha jiva phalam tvadrisha kirtanam hi sudurlabha bhagavata hi loke. O devotee of the Lord, the purpose of the visual sense is fulfilled simply by seeing you, and to touch your body is the fulfillment of bodily touch. The tongue is meant for glorifying your qualities, because in this world a pure devotee of the Lord is very difficult to find. Originally, the senses of the living entity were awarded for this purpose, namely to engage them in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, or that of His devotees. But the conditioned souls, illusioned by the material energy, became captivated by sense enjoyment. Therefore, the whole process of God consciousness is meant to rectify the conditional activities of the senses and to re-engage them in the direct service of the Lord. Lord Brahma thus engaged his senses in the Lord by recreating the conditioned living entities to act in the recreated universe. This material universe is thus created and annihilated by the will of the Lord. It is created to give the conditioned soul a chance to act, to return home, back to Godhead. And servants like Brahmaji, Naradji, Vyasaji, and their company become busy with the same purpose of the Lord, to reclaim the conditioned souls from the field of sense gratification and return them to the normal stage of engaging the senses in the service of the Lord. Instead of doing so, i.e., converting the actions of the senses, the impersonalists began to make the conditioned soul senseless and the Lord also senseless. That is improper treatment for the conditioned souls. The diseased condition of the senses may be treated by the curing the defect, but not by uprooting the senses altogether. When there is some disease in the eyes may be cured to see properly. Plucking out the eyes is no treatment. Similarly, the whole material disease is based on the process of sense gratification, and liberation from the diseased condition is re-engagement of the senses to see the beauty of the Lord, hear His glories, and act on His account. Thus, Brahmaji created the universal activities again. Translation once more. On the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, who is the object of transcendental enjoyment for the senses of the devotees, Brahma, with folded hands, began to recreate the universe full with living entities as it was previously. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In the English language, we find different sayings. So one saying will say, the pen is mightier than the sword. Agree? But then another saying will tell us, actions speak louder than words. One statement in the English language will tell us, opposites attract. Agree? Another statement will tell us, birds of a feather flock together. One statement in the English language will tell us, too many cooks spoil the broth. But another statement will tell us, many hands make light work. It's very interesting that these statements, although seemingly contradictory, are both true in their own context. And therefore we find another pair of statements in the English language. One statement will tell us, out of sight, out of mind. But another statement will tell us, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So which one is it? Out of sight, out of mind, or absence makes the heart grow fonder? Here we are seeing that Brahmaji, the Supreme Lord, disappeared. We have to just think about what that means for a moment. Imagine the Supreme Lord was in front of you, and the Supreme Lord just had a very, very intimate interaction with you. And the very next moment, the Supreme Lord just disappears. We have to just think for a moment what kind of separation Brahmaji must have felt. What kind of, how his heart must have dropped in that moment when the Supreme Lord disappeared. Out of sight, out of mind, or absence makes the heart grow fonder. Separation can cause a disconnection in relationship, or separation can cause an intensification of the connection. It could go either way. And therefore, Brahmaji knew the art of how to invoke presence in absence. How do you invoke the presence of the beloved in their absence? Brahmaji knew the art, because what did he do? As soon as the Supreme Lord left, as soon as the Supreme Lord disappeared, then the very next moment, Haraye Vihitanjali, with folded hands, he accepted it. And what did he do? The very next moment, he began to follow the instructions, and he began to engage in the service of the Lord. This is the great art of how to invoke presence in absence. We find this in all the great devotees of the Lord. Uddhavji knew that Krishna was going to disappear from the world. He knew that Krishna had a plan, and therefore he was hanging on to Krishna till the last moment, trying to be with Krishna, trying to hear Krishna. And Krishna told him, I'm going to go soon. You be prepared. And as soon as I leave, what I want you to do is go to Badrik Ashram and instruct all the sages there, because I was not able to meet them. And then sure enough, the Supreme Lord removed himself from the world. And the very next moment, Uddhavji realized what he had to do to deal with that separation. The very next moment, he immediately went to Badrik Ashram to fulfill the instructions of the Lord and engage in the Lord's service. In the purport, in the Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada says, Uddhav knew the secret that the order of the Lord is non-different from the Lord. And therefore, while feeling the separation of the Lord, if he honored the order of the Lord, then he would again feel the presence of the Lord in his life. So this is a great art. Srila Prabhupada writes in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, the spiritual master lives forever in his instructions, and the follower lives with him. The Chaitanya Charitamrita is the most comprehensive biography on the life and times of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But sometimes there is a discussion amongst the scholars. Why did Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami not talk about the disappearance of the Lord? He documented everything. The tattva of the Lord, the birth of the Lord, the interactions of the Lord, the conversations of the Lord, the confidential moods of the Lord. But why did he not speak about the disappearance of the Lord? So the general answer that's given is that Kaviraj Goswami didn't speak about the disappearance of the Lord because it was too painful. It was too painful. It was heartbreaking. He couldn't bring himself to write anything about the Supreme Lord's disappearance because it was too painful to his heart. However, another scholar says Kaviraj Goswami had a different strategy. Because what's the very, very final chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita? Shikshashtakam. He said Kaviraj Goswami was actually teaching us something very, very profound. By placing Shikshastakam, the instructions of the Lord, as the very final chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, what Krishnadas Kaviraj was teaching us is that the Lord and His presence is immortalized in the instructions. Kaviraj Goswami was teaching us that actually the Lord didn't disappear. Actually the Lord continues to exist. Later on, Bhaktivinoda Thakur confirmed this. Adya piha shay leela kaha gaura roy. Kona kona bhagyavan dekhi bar pai. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes are going on even today. Kona kona bhagyavan. But who is that very fortunate person? Dekhi bar pai. That person can see. So this commentator says Mahaprabhu never disappeared. That's why Kaviraj Goswami never talked about the disappearance of Mahaprabhu. Because Mahaprabhu exists forever in his instructions. And if one follows those instructions, then one continues to see the pastimes of Mahaprabhu. It's said that once Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was in Sri Dham Mayapur, and in the middle of the night, he woke up and he started shouting, "Did you see? Did you see? Did you see?" Everyone's thinking, well, we only saw something in our dreams. We're half asleep. And then the devotees woke up. He said, "Didn't you see the Sankirtan party of Mahaprabhu and Nityananda just went by?" Who can see? Yesterday we were talking about the invisible world. So this is the invisible world, the other dimension of reality by which the devotees are continue to interact with those personalities who seemingly have left this world. So this is a great art. In service, in following instructions, one invokes a very, very deep presence of the beloved. And this is very, very important for us. Because what will happen in our life inevitably by the waves of time is that very, very dear personalities in our life will disappear from our vision. Those personalities who guided us, those personalities who nourished us, those personalities of whose mercy we're made of, at one point, likely in our life, will disappear. And therefore, how do we continue to feel their presence in their absence? Brahmaji is giving us the answer. Immediately, engage and take shelter of the order, the instruction, and the service. That will invoke their presence. And therefore, if you look at all the great devotees, what they did is they based their life on instruction. Brahmaji got the instruction to create, and therefore he based his whole life to fulfill that service. Mahaprabhu was instructed by his spiritual master, Murkha tumi tomar nahek vedanta dikar, Krishna mantra japa sada ei mantra sar. You're a fool. You have no qualification to study Vedanta. Simply chant the Harinam, the holy name of Krishna, ei mantra sar. This is the essence of everything. And what did Mahaprabhu do? That's what he did for his whole life. Chanted and danced, following the order. Mahaprabhu instructed the Goswamis, and those instructions became the basis of their whole life. Bhakta bhakti Krishna prem tatvera nidhar, Vaishnavera kritya ara Vaishnava achar, Krishna bhakti Krishna prem seva pravatan, lupta tirtha udara ar vairagya shikshan. Mahaprabhu gave these instructions to the Goswamis. Write books, establish temples, establish what Vaishnav culture is, excavate the holy places, show the ideal example of renunciation. These instructions became the basis of their life. Srila Prabhupada was given an instruction, you're young, you're intelligent, why don't you spread Krishna consciousness all over the world? And those instructions became the basis of Srila Prabhupada's life. Srila Prabhupada's followers received instructions from Srila Prabhupada, and those instructions became the basis of their life. His Holiness Indradyumna Maharaj explains that once he was in France, so he went to Srila Prabhupada to ask for an instruction. And the instruction that His Holiness Indradyumna Maharaj received from Srila Prabhupada, preach boldly and always have faith in the holy name of Krishna. So didn't he follow that? Doesn't he continue to follow that? Isn't his whole life based around that instruction? That is what an intelligent disciple will do. So like this, we receive instructions, and then those instructions become the basis of our life. When I was 15, I went to a Pandavasena program, our youth group. So I was very new. And His Holiness Shivaram Maharaj was giving the talk. So at the end of the program, one of the devotees came up to me and said, he's a Swami, you have to ask him a question. I said, but I don't have any question. He said, no, when a Swami is here, you have to ask a question. I said, but I'm clear, I'm okay. So then he said, if you don't ask a question, then you have to ask for an instruction. So at this moment in my Krishna conscious evolution, I never knew what an instruction was. So I went up to His Holiness Shivaram Swami. For those of you who know, Shivaram Swami is quite intimidating, it's quite serious. So I looked at him and I said, Swamiji, can you give me an instruction? I had no idea. So as soon as I said that, all the other devotees came to hear. And then Shivaram Swami looked at me in the most serious facial expression. And he looked at me and he said, don't be boring. So that was the instruction I received when I was 15 years old. Don't be boring. So even today when I wake up, I sometimes think, I have to make sure I don't be boring, you know. I have to live a meaningful life, some adventure, some excitement, some laughter, some rasa. So like that, these instructions are all powerful. they form the basis and they really guide our life. So therefore, a devotee looks to gather these instructions and then mold all of their life directions through these instructions. Today, what I want to share with you is 5 instructions that I received about instructions. Five things to keep in mind about the instructions that you receive from the great souls that allow you to invoke their presence even in their absence. The first instruction about instructions is that instructions are unlimited. When you receive an instruction from the spiritual master, when the Supreme Lord gives us an instruction, we should understand that those instructions are unlimited and they can be fulfilled constantly in bigger and better ways. An instruction is like a seed which is planted within the heart of a sincere disciple, and that seed of that instruction can grow and grow and grow unlimitedly. And therefore, there will never be a time in a disciple's life when they can say, I did it. I've ticked it off the to-do list. No, because the instructions are unlimited. Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master told him, preach in the English language. Srila Prabhupada could have written one book in English and said, done. But he didn't. He continued writing and he continued translating till the final moment. Srila Prabhupada could have gone to one Western city and preached and said, done, but he didn't. He continued traveling till the last moment. He could have initiated one disciple and said, done, but he didn't. He continued and initiated thousands of disciples. In other words, Srila Prabhupada continued going above and beyond the call of duty, understanding that the instructions of the Supreme Lord are unlimited and are always applicable and are always alive in the heart and mind of the sincere disciple. After the whole Kurukshetra had finished, then Arjun was reflecting, Deshakalartha yuktani rittapo pashamani cha haranti smarataschitam govinda bhitani me. He said, now I am remembering those instructions which Krishna imparted to me. Those instructions, Desha Kalartha Yuktani, those instructions are applicable, are relevant, are alive in all times, places, and circumstances. And therefore, the instructions that one receives are unlimited. The second thing that we should realize about instructions is that instructions can never be denied. But sometimes instructions may have to be delayed. Sometimes we receive an instruction and we think, I can't do this, therefore let me discard it. But even if you can't fulfill the instruction at this moment, what we learn through our Vaishnav history is that if you keep that instruction and you try to slowly contribute towards fulfillment of that instruction, then eventually a time in life will come when you can fulfill that instruction. His Holiness Giriraj Maharaj explains that he got this direct instruction from Srila Prabhupada, that Prabhupada had seen one of his articles in Back to Godhead, and Prabhupada very much appreciated his writing. It's very interesting because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saw one of Prabhupada's writings, and he appreciated our Srila Prabhupada's writings very, very much. He said, if he writes anything, just publish it. No one has to check. So Srila Prabhupada saw the same thing in His Holiness Giriraj Maharaj. So he said to Giriraj Maharaj, you write very well, you should train under me, I will train you to write. He told this to Giriraj Maharaj in Gorakhpur. And so Giriraj Maharaj was over the moon, so he got his diaries, his pens, his notebooks, and he was going to meet Srila Prabhupada. And somehow on the way there, Hansadutta Prabhu hijacked the whole situation and said he should be part of the World Sankirtan party. So he couldn't go to meet Prabhupada to get trained. Then later on, he tried to go again to meet Srila Prabhupada, and instead he was drafted here to Mumbai. And Shyam Sundar Prabhu had him fundraising for the Cross Maidan festival, and he got again absorbed in another service. And then after some time, he went to see Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada looked at him and said, how's the writing going? He said, well, I mean, the intention is there, but, Vaishnavas have other plans for me. And then Prabhupada looked at him and he said, don't worry. The instruction of the spiritual master can be delayed, but it can never be denied. And now don't we see His Holiness Giriraj Maharaj just writing such prolific, powerful, and heart-touching books? Because the spiritual master's instruction can never go in vain. It must happen. The third instruction about instructions of the spiritual master is that one should understand the instructions of the spiritual master in essence. This is very, very important. In 1933, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was giving a lecture at the Samadhi of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. And in the lecture he said, my spiritual master gave me 3 instructions. Number 1, never make any disciples. Number 2, never associate with materialistic persons. Number 3, never go to Calcutta. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was proudly saying, very boldly saying, yes, my spiritual master gave me these. Everyone's looking at him thinking, you didn't make no disciples? Thousands of disciples. Don't associate with materialistic people. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was searching out the most people who are furthest away from Krishna consciousness. And don't go to Calcutta. Practically he was running the affairs of Gaudiya Math from Calcutta only. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, I followed my spiritual master perfectly. Because when he told me, don't make any disciples, I followed it. Because all these individuals who have come to take shelter of me, I take them as representatives of my own spiritual master who have come to teach me. My spiritual master told me, don't associate with materialistic people. But to associate with someone means to take something from them. So when I associated with all these worldly minded people, I never took anything from them, but rather I gave them Vaishnav Sangha. And he said, I never went to Calcutta, because whenever I went to that city, then I always stayed in Bagh Bazar temple, which is an embassy of the spiritual world and which is not within the jurisdiction of this material manifestation. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur understood the heart of his spiritual master. He understood the instruction in essence. And therefore, a Vaishnav is known as Saragrahi, one who is able to grasp the essence. And therefore, instructions should be understood in essence. The fourth instruction about instructions, I wrote it down, let me just read. Forgot that one. Is that instructions are always available. One time Srila Prabhupada said, I instruct my disciples privately in public. Very interesting. If one is sincere, if one is tuned in, if one really wants to hear, then one can hear the spiritual master speaking to them. One can hear the Lord speaking to them in person, individually, even when seemingly it's done in a public or a general context, because we hear according to the condition of the heart. Once there was a guru with a disciple and they were in Times Square. So for those of you who have been Times Square, it's absolute chaos, noisy, busy, and all kinds of activities going on. So as they were walking, the guru stopped and he said, "Hear that?" So the disciple was thinking, "Hear what? So many things to hear." So the guru said, "Didn't you hear that cry for help?" So the disciple was thinking, what is he talking about? So then they went behind a bench and there was one small puppy who was crying, was injured, crying for help. So the disciple was flabbergasted. How in the noise of all of this did you hear that puppy who was crying for help? So he asked the guru, how did you hear this in the midst of all this noise? The guru said, we hear what we want to hear. And he said, I'll prove it to you. And what they did is they went into Times Square, and in the midst of that busy, noisy atmosphere, the guru dropped one coin. Ding! Immediately hundreds of people stopped. Is it mine? Is it mine? Is it mine? If your heart is full of lust and greed, then you will hear that which may satisfy your lust and greed. But if your heart is a heart which is desiring service, if your heart is a heart which desires selfless sacrifice and loving contribution, then your heart will be able to immediately pick up on the opportunities that the spiritual master and his representatives are giving one to do such a thing. And so, instructions are also live. Sometimes we feel that I didn't receive any instructions personally. I never got the time. I never got the association. But they are always available if one's heart is in the right condition. And the final instruction about instructions that I would like to share with you this morning is that instructions go beyond one's intelligence. Sometimes one receives an instruction and one has no idea how this instruction is relevant, how this instruction will come to fruition, why this instruction has even been given in the first place. Sometimes one receives instructions which are practically unintelligible to one's being. However, Srila Prabhupada also said this. He said he receives sometimes certain instructions from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He said, He said, on this point of book distribution, he said once in a letter, I followed my spiritual master blindly. I had no idea. I couldn't figure it out in my mind. Why is he saying print books, print books, print books? What's that going to do? Why is that so important? He said, on this point, I followed him blindly, not knowing all the logic behind it. But because Srila Prabhupada followed it, and eventually it all came to fruition. Because the spiritual master, the great personalities, the Supreme Lord, they have a broader vision than us. And therefore they can see and predict things that we can't see. Therefore, sometimes you will receive an instruction and you think you understand it. But later on, you'll realize there's so much more to this instruction that didn't register within me that now I know. Sometimes you'll receive an instruction and it won't make sense, but later on in your life, it may make sense. And even now, there may be instructions that one has received that still one has no idea why. But sure enough, as time unfolds, then the plan of the great personalities also unfolds. So like this, we're hearing of how Brahmaji invoked the presence of the Lord in his absence because he grasped the order, the instructions, and the service of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada is explaining in the purport that he fully engaged his senses, his mind, all his faculties in fulfilling the desire of the Supreme Lord, to create this material manifestation as a means for the living entities to ultimately recognize and realize their true identity beyond this world. And therefore, Brahmaji did his service in a very wonderful way. And Prabhupada explains, all those who came after Brahma, Narad, Vyas, and all the representatives of Vyas, they come into this material manifestation. And through the instructions that they give to the living entities, they explain how one can utilize their senses to serve the Supreme Lord and ultimately achieve the perfection of life. So these are some thoughts that I wanted to share with you today about instructions about instructions, and how following these instructions are the great wealth that we have in our life, which allows us to constantly feel the presence of those who may not be physically in front of our eyes, but who are still very, very much active in everything that is happening in our journey. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Okay. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. So we have some time if there are any comments, corrections, questions, instructions.
Swamiji, sometimes the instructions may be circumstantial or managerial. So how does one understand that this is because I got it only because I was in that circumstance, and anyone that would have been in that circumstance would have got. So especially because you're not in that particular circumstance now, or you're not in that particular service now. So how does one understand an instruction that is very personal to you, and it just because it is in a particular circumstance it was given?
So sometimes we receive instructions and they're in a very specific circumstance. So how do we know how literally to take that, how closely to follow that? So definitely we know in that situation one should follow completely that instruction in that particular situation. But then one must go further. One must understand the heart. One must understand the essence. One must understand what is the purpose behind that instruction. And therefore, it's not that just that one tries to follow the instruction, but one actually tries to understand the personality deeply who is giving the instruction. Sometimes people read Srila Prabhupada's books, and of course now we're facing in the Western world, sometimes people feel very taken aback by sometimes the tone of Srila Prabhupada's speech, that sometimes they feel it to be conservative or somewhat uneasy for the postmodern mind to accept. So what I share with those people is don't just read Srila Prabhupada's books, but also try to understand Srila Prabhupada as a person. What did Srila Prabhupada do in his life? How did he act? What qualities did he live by? What values were important to him? What did he do in specific situations and interactions? And when you understand the author, then you can understand the writings in a much deeper way. And similarly, if you want to understand the instructions that a particular personality gives you, it's very, very important to understand the heart, the character, the personality of that individual, because then one will be able to contextualize those instructions and understand the essence in a much deeper way. And so like this, we are very much trying to connect with the person behind the instruction. Is that okay?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for a very beautiful class on instructions. Sometimes actually it got us thinking in various ways. Sometimes we have received an instruction from a guru or from some authority, and we genuinely want to do it, but we just don't have either the will or the ability at that point of time. So one of the things you said is that it is an eternal instruction, so it can be done later also. But how do we know? Are we just disobeying the order, disobeying the instruction, or are we just waiting that maybe when at an appropriate time I will probably fulfill the instruction? So how do we know the distinction between the two?
So an instruction is given and we're not able to immediately follow it. So how do we know that we're on a progressive path and that we are not? In the Shastra is mentioned that there are 6 types of lesser disciples, sevaka dhamma, 6 types of deficient disciple. And one of the deficient disciples is known as Jyotishakaha, the astrologer disciple. That's the disciple who receives an instruction and says, yes, yes, I will do, but when the alignment comes like this and this is in place and that is in place, when the stars decide that the time is right, then I'm ready. They're waiting for something to happen, some astrological constellation that happens once in a kalpa. So the idea is that if one is not able to follow the instruction, one should be doing something in their life to qualify themselves to work towards the fulfillment of that instruction. Srila Prabhupada was told in 1922, preach in the Western world. Srila Prabhupada didn't go till 1965. But what was it? A lifetime in preparation. So therefore, Prabhupada accepted it, and he already begun writing, preparing. He already was praying, he was meditating. In 1959, he went to Radha Damodar temple. He knew, I need the empowerment of Rupa Goswami. So he was doing everything in order to qualify himself, of course. He was just showing the example to fulfill that order of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So as long as we are working towards it, as long as it's on our mind, as long as it's in our heart, and we are feeling that little bit uncomfortable that I should be doing something about this, then we can understand that we are on a progressive path like that. Is that okay? Oh, Sridham Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Nice to see you, Sridham Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much for a fantastic class and giving the different perspective of when out of sight is not out of mind, but like, you can really make that connection. So it's very wonderfully that you explain about instructions. But when it comes to the reality, when we just go out of this temple hall, it becomes a different world for us. And even though we try hard to connect, and for me, the instruction, as you rightly explained, and I was thinking about for past few days about how only the Prabhupada is not the only Prabhupada, but if you see from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples, Srila Prabhupada is the one who made that connection. Others also made that connection, but Srila Prabhupada was that special one who made that real connection through that instruction. So what is that quality one has to develop to establish that strong connection? Because so much of Hriday Durbalyam, so much of other distractions and other things. So what is that disciple has to do in order to get connected to the spiritual master? Of course, the instruction is there, we follow, but many times not able to follow, very honest. But what is that one has to do to go deeper and more stronger, Maharaj, if you can explain. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the spiritual master gives us instructions, yet sometimes we become distracted, we become diverted, and focus and the attention on that instruction may get lost in the chaos of life. So how do we actually develop that deep connection with Guru, who is giving us this instruction so that it's constantly on our mind? When Srila Prabhupada became very sick in America, then at one point Srila Prabhupada said, I think I have to go back to India. So the devotees were very young, they were very inexperienced, the Krishna consciousness movement had just begun. And so Srila Prabhupada said, I have to go back to recuperate my health. So then one devotee, one evening, he said, Swamiji, you're going back. How will we continue on? And then one devotee said, Swamiji, maybe one of your god brothers could come instead and take care of us. And in that moment, Prabhupada looked down and he said, my spiritual master was no ordinary spiritual master. He saved me. And in that moment, the disciples realized, oh no, we made a big blunder. How could we just think someone can come and replace Prabhupada? My spiritual master saved me. And therefore, unless one has that level of feeling, unless the gravity of the gift of the Guru, what they have done, unless that dawns upon one's heart, the instructions will not penetrate one's life in a deep way. And so the more we realize, I was nowhere, I was no one, and I had no chance, but my spiritual master picked me up and saved me. And when that gravity of that dawns, then one will know when they wake up in the morning, there's only one thing I have to do, and that is, I have to follow the instructions.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I just wanted to.
Please give me some instruction.
No, we are very, very happy to have you here. We've been waiting for so many years to come. So Maharaj, there is one particular observation that, when a disciple or a particular devotee gets an instruction, a specific instruction, and then at the same time there are sort of universal Gaudiya instructions or Prabhupada's instructions where he has told us to be servant of servant, to be cooperative in mission. Sometimes the tendency could be that with a particular instruction, we start working what we call in silos.
Mhm.
This is my instruction, this is my silo, and I'll work here. And maybe it is counterproductive for the overall mission of Prabhupada. So how do we really make sure that a particular instruction is not counterproductive with the overall universal instruction that we have got as part of ISKCON or as part of being Gaudiyas? So I think that something which I thought
Thank you
would
so
be
much,
nice
yeah.
for me to understand.
Yeah, such a nice point. So we receive our own individual personalized instructions, and then we have a unified mission as ISKCON to work together. We live in communities where we have to sometimes sideline, or not sideline, or sometimes accept that certain individual ideas, spiritual ambitions we may have to be put on hold for a bigger mission. So how do we blend those two? And this, I think, is the challenge of leadership. I think this is where Srila Prabhupada was so expert, because he was able to find unity in diversity. He was able to take individuals who had very different abilities, aptitudes, personalities. He was able to find a place for their individual expression and also simultaneously bring them together to create a unified, powerful mission. I mean, the level of cooperation that Srila Prabhupada was able to draw from his disciples it's just insane. It's incredible. It's, in 1976, a small band of devotees in the southern states of America ordered 1 million Bhagavad Gitas to be printed. The trains that it took to bring the paper to the paper mill stretched for nearly 2 miles. And in the history of the world up until that point, nobody had ever ordered 1 million books printed of any book. It was a world record. I mean, it's incredible to think how Srila Prabhupada took individuals and he just took their individual abilities and gave them separate instructions which perfectly molded. I mean, we were just in New Vrindavan and we were on the TSI retreat. So TSI is like the American youth. So we were sitting in the Palace of Gold. And it was incredible because I was with the youth and I told them, in 1970, this was ISKCON. It was this moment when we realized 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds. I said, there was no youth group. This was ISKCON. This is it. This is ISKCON. This is the international society, all of you. And look at what they created. And I mean, if you see the Palace of Gold, it's just incredible. It's mind-blowing. So, spiritual leadership is such an incredible, it's just such an incredible thing. Because spiritual leadership with love, compassion, leadership which recognizes individuality, but then brings together individuals for a common cause, can give individual instructions and also instill the cooperative spirit by which they can be perfectly blended. Because actually it's those individual instructions which augment and which actually create the powerful overall contribution, that because when you have individuals, you do so many things who have different aptitudes. So I guess individuals should be flexible, but leaders should be expert in how to bring them all together. These are some thoughts. Probably you have a better answer than me.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you so much. I don't know how long we should go.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj, for this wonderful class.
Thank you, Maharaj, for the session. I think it's destined that I have come here for the first time, and I attended your kirtan yesterday. It was beautiful.
Okay, welcome.
Since I was a
We
child,
can give her a round of applause here for the first time. Thank you for coming.
this question is a little away from the instructions, which was also another question I have there. Two questions, sorry. The first question is, when Brahma saw that, Lord is going away, my question from childhood was that, why was there a need for God to create all of us? I have always had a curiosity to understand the purpose.
I think we've all thought that at some point.
That what was the inquisitiveness of Brahma and Lord to do this? And the second question, Maharaj, is that I have always feared the suffering of loss, especially of loved ones. But in our real lives, for example, our parents are children. If we lose them and they have not given us instruction, for example, then how do we bear that suffering? Then how do we cope with it?
Okay, thank you so
Sorry,
much.
too long.
No, very good questions. Thank you so much. I was just thinking, how is it that you came to the temple for the first time and you asked such a deep question? That's the question of someone who's been coming here for 5 years. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so maybe we begin with your second question. What about if you have a loved one who never gave you any instructions? Maybe one more instruction about instruction that I can offer all of you, in addition to the 5 that I gave you, is that instructions are not just directive, but instructions are also demonstrative. What I mean by that is that sometimes instructions are given to you by a superior by their speech. They tell you this, this, and this. But oftentimes, for one who is eager to draw the instruction from the superior, they can actually draw the instruction simply by observing. If you observe someone who you respect, who you value, who you are inspired by very deeply, then what will happen is simply by observing them, you'll already understand what the instruction is. You don't need to be told. Therefore, it's said that the first-class disciple knows the heart of the spiritual master before they've even said what it is. They follow without even having to be asked, like that. So, therefore, instructions are not just what directly come to you, but they're also demonstrated. And then in answer to your first question, why did Krishna create all of us? Something like this. Why did Krishna create us? Yeah, these are all somewhat inconceivable. You see, we think of life in a very like a linear narrative. First there was Krishna, and then there was Krishna created us, and now we're here. And it's almost an inconceivable point. We're eternally existing with Krishna in relationships of love. The spiritual world is a timeless place. And therefore, we eternally, but then you may say, how is it that we are created by Krishna, but that we're eternally with Krishna? How can that coexist? That's where language is unable to fully elucidate these spiritual concepts. Like, for example, does sunlight come from the sun? Yes or no? Yes. But can you ever have a sun without sunlight? So in one sense, one comes from the other, but in another sense, they're completely inseparable. They coexist. So in the same way, the spiritual, the living entities come from Krishna, but in another sense, they're eternal, because Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you. So sometimes for people, it's mind-blowing. So what to do? These are spiritual concepts. So yes, it's not in one sense that Krishna was kind of bored at one time and then he just like, okay, let me just create a few of these people, just to have some fun, you know. We're eternally existing with Krishna in relationships of love. So hope that helps. Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your kind attention, for your encouragement. Please forgive me for any mistakes. I hope to be with all of you again very, very soon. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.